So if I excel, maybe I won't be punished, right? If I excel in speaking or writing or showing up as a leader or getting all A's or whatever, like I said at the beginning, school was my safe space, right?
Yeah.
Because in that space, the rules were clear. Like, if you do all these things and you do them perfectly, you get the A. You get the reward, right? So the rules were clear and not as arbitrary as they were at home. So whereas at home, the rules might be one thing one day and they might be something else the next day. So at some level, I was intelligent, intellectually very strong, yet emotionally incredibly retarded.
Welcome to the Secrets of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis. Well, today's episode with Emerald GreenForest, Emerald really shares, I was actually on her podcast, Men on Purpose, about a year ago at the time of recording her episode with us. She also does a podcast for women as well, just sort of separating the markets and her guests. But one of the things that was really interesting about this episode is Emerald has been through a fair amount of trauma in her life. And this is actually what she does now, is to help others who are going through stuff. So she talks about in the show, same stuff, different day, and you're not happy with that stuff. So what are you going to do about it? What are you going to do to change to get out of that stuff? And are you going to work on yourself? So one of the discussions that we had is, it's amazing to me anyways, that there are many people who want to have different outcomes. They want to improve their life. They want to have better relationships. They want to be clear about themselves. They want to bring more confidence. They want to improve their communication skills, whatever the case might be. But they're not willing to invest in themselves. They're not willing to do anything for themselves as far as an investment. And, I've shared this story before, where my son in university had a friend who asked, I said, well, how much is your dad's personal style indicator online? And he said, well, it's $45 retail. And he said, that's $45. I'm not spending that on myself. And that weekend, he went to a movie, had a pizza and a beer, and spent $75. And so, what you're spending your money on, if you're not willing to invest in yourself, then how are you going to shift? And then we also talk about, mentorship or coaching, which is some of the services that we have here as well. But one of the things that we have launched a while ago now is one of our online courses is, what do you really value? And it's such a simple yet powerful process where you take our values preference indicator, get to know what your behavioral or motivational values are, and I take you through the course, a step-by-step process to understand what this means for you. Are they being met? Are they not being met? What are you doing to fulfill them? What are you not doing to fulfill them? And really provide a simple yet powerful roadmap. And we use a metaphor where, so what would it mean to you if you could make the right decision every time? And that is a play on words, but the reality is it's very close to that. Because once I filter my decisions based on my values, then I can make the right decision every time, because I'm using a framework. The challenge is, majority of people don't know what they are. And if you're one of them, my encouragement is that you would take a look at that. So thank you again for listening. If you like what we're doing, pass it on, share it, let somebody else know about it, leave a positive comment on whatever platform you're on. If you know of an amazing guest that would fit the Secrets of Success framework, then we're more than keen. And if you're a host, we're more than keen than being a guest on your show. So thank you for listening. So here's our show with Emerald GreenForest. Welcome to the Secrets of Success podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis. Well, today's guest, I had the pleasure of being on her podcast. Well, actually, it's almost a year ago, if you can believe it, on Men on Purpose. And so we'll get into sort of how she started that, and there was a recent development on that podcast as well. She's also a host of Wickedly Smart Women podcast, both rated, in the top 50 or 75 in their categories. So welcome to the show, Emerald GreenForest. Welcome, Emerald.
Thank you so much, Ken, for having me. Delighted to be here.
Well, we actually sent an invitation out to you many months ago, but you're so busy, we couldn't get you on till now. So thanks for taking the time to kind of hang out with us.
Oh, you are so welcome. And yes, that happens sometimes. We can get invitations that we don't answer for quite a while, but we're here, so that's the important thing. We finally made it.
So, Emerald, of course, you're in the business of really helping others to realize their purpose and to be successful in life. And before we get into sort of that current space that you're doing and what you're doing, we always like story here at Secrets of Success in your journey and how you got to where you're at right now and some of the life lessons that you've learned along the way. So what was sort of like family life growing up for you?
Well, that's a great question, Ken. So family life growing up for me, on the one hand, I grew up in a white Anglo-Saxon Protestant little tiny village in New Hampshire with cows and chickens and all the other farmland. It was a lot of farmland and vegetables and fruits and so forth all around us. And my parents were dysfunctional, to say the least. My dad was a raging alcoholic, and my mom likely had undiagnosed borderline personality disorder or some other kind of mental health issue. So it was a very it was a very bucolic and traumatic childhood all rolled into one.
Now, do you have siblings, Emerald?
I am the oldest of my mother and father's marriage, and I have a younger brother, but they were both married before, so I have an older brother on my mom's side that's 15 years older, and an older brother and sister that are 15 and 13 years older on my dad's side. So I actually also lived through both of my brothers being in the Vietnam War when I was little.
Wow. So when you think about this sort of tension at home, what do you think some of the impacts were to you as a young child growing up in that environment?
Yeah, well, certainly I experienced a lot of physical, mental, emotional, and psychological abuse, that's for sure. And, as a result of that, created a lot of trauma and drama in my own life. So as I grew older, I, went down the road of addiction myself for a while, got involved in all kinds of relationships that were dysfunctional and kind of repeats of the patterns that were laid down in my childhood. But the other thing that, I will have to say is that as a result of the experiences I had, I have been able, thankfully, due to some really powerful choices that I made along the way, I've been able to transmute the crap into gold. So I've been able to, I've managed to, with, some of my own techniques and technologies, but also with other techniques and technologies that I invested in myself over time to get help. To get the help and to heal a lot of the things. So now I'm able to actually be successful. I'm able to speak my truth. I'm able to tell the hard stories without falling apart or without hiding them. I'm able to help other people who have, experienced some kind of trauma in their life. And there's, trauma is trauma. Even though there are varying degrees of trauma, somebody who's traumatized is still somebody who's traumatized. So I've been able to transmute the challenges that I faced into service to others.
Well, I want to come into that in depth a little bit later in the show. But before we get there, where did you go after high school?
Great. So when I graduated from high school, I actually graduated a year early because I was very intelligent and school was my safe space. So I was actually 27th out of 127 in a class where I graduated in 3 years instead of 4 years. Everybody else was a 4-year graduate. So I went to college for 1 year, but my dad had lost his job because of his alcoholism literally 2 weeks before I graduated high school. So I got 1 year in college, and my original trajectory was I was going to be a biochemist and maybe even ultimately a pharmacist. I was very heavily into the sciences. But the trajectory of my life changed, and I ended up ultimately, I ended up in the real estate industry. And so I spent almost 20 years in the real estate industry. And at the end of that career, I was building 51 single-family houses, 56 apartments, and an office building with 2 partners. I was the national chairperson of my trade association, and we represented 1 in 8 homeowners in the country. Yeah, and then I had a spiritual awakening in my late 30s. And after that, I left the real estate industry and started to dive deep into personal development.
So hang on, how does somebody get into this real estate space and then have this significant amount of success? Explain to the audience. We just love a story about how these things weave the intricacies of our life, but how did that unfold?
Well, I started in the real estate industry. I think, what I do have to say is that I'm very gifted. I'm very gifted. I carry a lot of intelligence, and I'm also very persistent and very devoted to things functioning. So when I first started in the real estate industry, I literally came in the door and I was the receptionist. And within 10 days, I was promoted to being the assistant in the finance department. And within a few months, I was promoted to being manager, property manager. And with a few months after that, I was promoted to being the vice president for an entire division. And so I've had a lifetime of really being able to leap. And I don't know whether it was part of my, when I was little, I was put into kindergarten a year ahead, but then they took me out because my birthday was not the right birthday. But then I ended up graduating a year early. And so, I have this whole lifetime of leaping into a space, and then from getting into that space, leaping into a leadership position. And it has repeated again and again and again in my life. And I know what you're looking for here, Ken, is kind of the practical, tactical ways of doing it. But the truth, for me at least, is I just showed up and was myself. Mm-hmm. And as a result of that, I had the privilege and the gift of ending up always kind of precipitating myself up into a leadership role. I just continue no matter what industry I'm in. So after real estate, I was the youngest national chairperson of the association that I was the chair of. After real estate, I got into the healing arts and the arts, had my own art gallery and healing art center in the city that I live in, and literally led the entire city to become a new mecca for the arts in the area. And then I left that and went into the online space and became a leader at the front end of a wave of women that were rising up in the early 2010 time zone to speak and share their messages about, healing and consciousness raising. And so, yeah, I just have a life pattern of doing that. Mm-hmm. And I can't give you a step-by-step. Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you just for a second. I think, Emerald, part of the curiosity for me and the audience is, there's a lot of intelligent people that don't go anywhere. Right? I mean, they're sharp, but they're idiots, or they lack emotional intelligence. So what do you think were some of the characteristics and qualities? You showed up, you were persistent, but I suspect that's not enough to kind of get where you were at so quickly. So what were some of the things that you were doing that really attracted them to you to say, we need to promote Emerald here? She's really earned a position to go quicker and faster than other people. So what would you say to the audience, some of the character traits that you were deploying in a day in and day out basis to accelerate and grow so quickly?
Yeah, okay. So the first thing that comes to mind, Ken, is speak. I was willing to speak. I was willing to say, hey, I see a better way of doing this, or, here's my point of view, here's my perspective. I was willing to express myself verbally, and I was also willing to express myself in writing. So both verbal and written expression have definitely been a part of the journey for me, and even if it was unwieldy at times, like even right now, this interview feels a little unwieldy to me, but I'm here and I'm showing up and I'm saying what I'm saying because it is my truth. And so I would say the first thing is I continued to show up and express myself, even if it was messy. So that's the first thing.
So where do you think you got that courage from when you were, a lot of times when people have trauma, and we'll get into your process and how you got sort of flip that for yourself, is a lot of times people in trauma, they withdraw rather than kind of go out there.
I did that. I definitely. So there's parts of me, Ken, that are very withdrawn, and then there are parts of me that are very expressed. So I'm going to say even now there are parts of me that are tender and withdrawn that are still healing from the trauma of my childhood. In fact, I just did a piece of work last Monday, on a part of myself that has been holding my forward momentum back because she was trapped in that time, that little 3 or 4 year old part of myself. And so what I want to say is that I found ways to move the energy through me, such as writing and excelling. So excelling was actually a coping mechanism for me, Ken. Right? So if I excel, maybe I won't be punished, right? If I excel in speaking or writing or showing up as a leader or getting all A's or whatever, like I said at the beginning, school was my safe space, right?
Yeah.
Because in that space, the rules were clear. Like, if you do all these things and you do them perfectly, you get the A. You get the reward, right? So the rules were clear and not as arbitrary as they were at home. So whereas at home, the rules might be one thing one day and they might be something else the next day. So at some level, I was intelligent, intellectually very strong, yet emotionally incredibly retarded.
Well, one of the reasons I have so much curiosity, my mother, who is 86, she'll never listen to this podcast, so I'm good to go, is she is an adult child of alcoholism and was abused as a child, so physically abused. So I get that, and I even see, her scars that she hasn't processed even now at 86. And so I sort of have a personal curiosity just over how you did that. So
and so let me also say that I actually did not come into really powerfully being able to direct myself into my own full expression. So I expressed in service to others through my 20s and into my 30s. Like I played the game that allowed me to excel in the eyes of others. And it wasn't until my spiritual awakening that I was able to begin the process of unwinding that coping mechanism and starting to actually get access to my own feelings and my own physical body. And so one of the ways that I did that was I started the practice of yoga back in 2001. And that was like step one, was the practice of yoga.
Well, there's all kinds of research around, if I'm meditating or quiet and reflective, that's beneficial for us. And for sure, that's a powerful thing. So thank you for that. So you're doing the real estate. Then what? What happened after that?
Yeah, so there was more trauma in my family. My son experienced some severe trauma at daycare. And that exploded and imploded my marriage, and it also was a catalyst for my own spiritual awakening. And it caused me to leave the real estate industry as well, because I got very clear very quickly that I was in a toxic environment and toxic relationship with my business partners as well. So I ended up divorced. I ended up leaving my career behind and going on an inner journey. I literally had a spiritual awakening in a yoga class. So yoga was definitely a catalyst for me, because part of what happens, Ken, when you have had a traumatic childhood, especially an alcoholic childhood or an abusive childhood or some combination of both, is I left my body. I was out of my body. I like literally the only thing that counted was my head, right? So the intellect was supreme because that was my safe space, but I was out of my body and I was out of touch with my feelings. So in engaging in the practice of yoga, which is actually an ancient practice to unite. Yoga means uniting the mind and the body and the spirit. When you're out of your body, you've got to find a way back in. And so because of the yoga practice, I was able to start to open up those places and spaces within me that had been repressed, suppressed, or depressed while I was out of my body, performing.
Well, thank you for that, and thanks for sharing that, Emerald. What would you say to other individuals who are listening? They might not even know that they have sort of trauma. How do you kind of filter through and figure out if this is holding you back? So when you start thinking about this transformation that you went through, what would you say to those of us listening about what might be a next step or a consideration there?
Well, I think the first indicator that you have experienced trauma is when you repeatedly find yourself in patterns that are unhealthy or detrimental to, authentic thriving, authentic success. And even if you don't have memory of trauma, if you repeatedly find yourself in, either relationship patterns in your intimate relationships or patterns at work, like, oh man, no matter what I do, I always end up with the shitty boss kind of thing. That's a pattern, right? When you start to say to yourself, God, no matter what I do, X, Y, Z, that's a key indicator that there's a pattern there that needs to be looked at more deeply in order to get up underneath the pattern so that you can dismantle it at the core. It's not enough to, divorce the third husband because he's the same as the second husband and he's the same as the first husband who's ultimately probably the same as your father, right? It's not enough to just attempt to correct it on the surface. When you find that you are in a SSDD, same stuff, different day kind of situation, that is a key indicator that there is something much deeper going on at the core that you need to wake up to and walk away from. And this is actually step one of my Wealthy Life method, where I help people, step one, to wake up and walk away from what's not working. Instead of banging your head against the wall and keep saying, oh my God, it's not working, it's not working, it's not working, you have to actually wake up to and begin the excavation process of discovering why it's not working so that you can dismantle it.
So you had this awakening and transformation. What occurred then?
So after that happened, and what happened was I was actually in the park doing yoga, and I literally had my third eye burst open, and I could see these golden white orbs of light going up and down a staircase. It was the weirdest thing, Ken, because I was a real estate developer. I was like, what am I seeing? And when I sat up in the park and opened my physical eyes, everyone in the park was a golden white orb of light, and it was like literally that's how I was seeing through my eyes. And I even started asking myself an hour, 2 hours later, as I was still seeing in this way, is this the way I'm going to be seeing from now on? That everyone in the cars were golden white orbs of light. So after that experience, that opened up a whole lot for me, and a bunch of, as I said before, repressed, depressed, and suppressed aspects of myself started to emerge. So my author emerged, my healer emerged, my artist self emerged, my performer self emerged, and I gave myself permission to allow all of those aspects of myself to emerge and to start to claim them. So, until you write a book and publish it, you're not an author. But as soon as you have a published book in your hand, you can say, I am an author, right? You can say I'm a writer before that, but until you have a published book in your hand, you don't get to say, I'm an author. So I began this process then of just giving free rein to my spirit and giving free rein to the parts of myself that had been unexpressed for so long.
Mm-hmm. What would you say to listeners who are kind of choked up and maybe blocked in this step? What would be an encouragement or some things they can consider to do?
Oh, that's a great question. So one of the things that was super helpful for me was journaling. I began the process of just allowing the pen to write whatever wanted to be written, without concern for whether or not anyone was ever going to see it, without concern for whether or not it was grammatically correct, without concern for even what the words actually were on the page. Sometimes you just need to allow the energy to come out in some way. And so for me, journal writing was first on the list. And then making art for the sake of making art, not because I wanted to put it in a museum somewhere, but because the feelings of the repressed energy needed to be expressed, needed to come out. And I have a fun game that I sometimes advise some of my clients to do, which is get chocolate pudding and get some finger paper at the kids section of the store, of the supply store. They have finger paint paper. Get some finger paint paper, get some chocolate pudding, and get down on the floor with the chocolate pudding and the finger paint paper and just let yourself play with the finger paint paper and the chocolate pudding. You can even lick your fingers when you're done.
Yeah, and you can eat your art. There you go.
Exactly, you can eat your art, and what it does is it moves this stuckness. You said choked up. Well, that is an indicator that there is energy that's repressed, emotion that is repressed, that is seeking expression in some way. Mm-hmm. You could even start by humming. Just hum. If you feel choked up, start humming a little bit, just to be aware and let your body know, oh, I'm feeling stuck. I'm feeling choked up. I'm going to hum a little bit. Or whistle. My dad was a whistler. And now I know that his whistling was letting off steam. He was letting off steam. Mm-hmm. So find the ways that bring you delight or at least bring you relief, and move your body. If it's walking, if it's bicycling, if it's dancing, if it's yoga practice, even if it's just rocking in a rocking chair, to begin to move things. Getting things moving is the key.
Excellent. So how did you get into this development space? And I'm curious about, here's this individual, you have a father who, quite frankly, was abusive. And then you start a podcast, Men on Purpose. Help me with that one.
Yeah, great question. Well, so from between 2008 to 2016, I actually had a business called The Empowered Messenger, and it was my online speaking and mentorship coaching business. I don't like to call it coaching because I'm not a coach. I'm more of a mentor guide, trusted advisor. And that business was primarily aimed at women. I helped women to feel great speaking and powerful asking for money. And then in 2016, we reached a culmination of 7 years of my son and I being entangled where he was addicted to heroin and a variety of other drugs. He was fully engaged in the addiction storyline. And in 2016, he actually, we had a life rupture in my house with him. And after that, everything changed in my life. Everything, my business disintegrated. I had another level of spiritual awakening. And when I came out of that, I had a calling to start serving men, which I follow the calling. So my life since 2001, since my spiritual awakening, has been, follow the calling, because the calling has healed me. The calling has held me. The calling has has been that into which I've poured my life in service to not only the world, but also to my own evolution and growth. And so I got this calling to serve men, and I ended up rebranding my business and putting it out there that I was going to start serving men. And as a result of that process, the podcast emerged as a marketing vehicle with which to reach the men that I felt called to serve. But what was really happening, Ken, was every single episode, yours included, was an opportunity for me to heal my relationship with men.
Mm-hmm.
Because what happened after what happened with my son was I became clear that I had been involved in relationships with men that were either abusive, had some form of addiction as part of them, or I felt alienated for my entire life. And I finally saw in 2016-17, I finally saw I was the single unifying thread in all of those relationships. And so when I shifted my focus and I began to consciously choose to seek out and elevate, celebrate, and spotlight what I called men on purpose, it allowed me to have an entirely different experience of men, and it allowed me to have a huge healing around my relationship with men.
Now, I want to just stop for a moment. I have a question that's been given me, and that was just, what would you say to people out there that have sort of an embittered or bitterness towards a group? I don't know the group. It's just a group. It could be women, could be men, could be whatever. What would you say to them to let that go? And then what you really did is, and this is what we teach at CRG too, is taking full responsibility and not being a victim. What would you say to those people listening out there where they have some kind of unforgiveness or bitterness in their heart?
Yeah. Well,
and I'm not. What's the word? I'm not saying that what somebody did is supportive or right, or you are agreeing with it. But how can I get free then?
Yeah. Well, I think the very first step is to not be in denial that you were abused, if you were abused. So I think that's a big challenge. A lot of times people just want to push that under the rug and forget about it, but it's there. It's not going to go away if you don't shine the light on it. So step one is to stop pretending it didn't happen, first of all, and then take responsibility for doing your own part in dismantling your internal response to a traumatic experience. We are not saying that it is excusable, right? We're not saying that a traumatic abusive experience is excusable, but what we are intending here with this expression of how to navigate that bitterness is first admit that it happened, acknowledge that you were hurt, care for the part of yourself that was injured, and then from there begin to dismantle in yourself the pattern of response that continues to play out that is really asking you to just look at the boo-boo. Let's look at this wound. Especially if you're caught in a repeating pattern of SSDD, it's because you haven't looked at that core initial wound. So, and then from there, once you start to dismantle your conditioned responses, then you have power, because all of your energy has been put into perpetuating and maintaining your conditioned responses to keep you safe. And once you have power unleashed, once you have dismantled that conditioning, you literally have unleashed a huge amount of life force and a huge amount of energy, and from there you can choose what you want to create instead. So in my case, I chose to create an experience of connecting with, elevating, celebrating, and spotlighting men on purpose. But I could not have gotten there if I hadn't done all that other work first.
Of course. Well, Thank you, Emerald, for sharing that, and really encourage audience members to not play the victim. We're not suggesting that what happened was permissible, as you said, or excusable, or any verb somebody wants to use or describe her. But the reality is, in the end, I have to take responsibility. So what do you think
I want to take that apart.
Created this move for you to get out of where you're at and then take ownership that you were the thread?
Yeah, I want to take responsibility apart piece right there that you said we have to take responsibility. I want to be very clear with the listeners. A lot of times people hear those words, take responsibility, and it's like there's a feeling of exhaustion. There's a feeling of, oh my God, why do I have to take this on when they were the one that did this thing, right? And so I want to really unpack the word responsibility, and I want to cycle it back to what I just said about responsibility is your ability to respond. So if your ability to respond is hijacked by perpetuating patterns of coping that were created by the original injury, if your energy and your ability to respond is all coagulated in that, then that's the only way you can respond, is as a victim. But the work here is to decondition, to admit that the first thing, the initial trauma happened. Don't, excuse the other person, but excuse yourself. Excuse yourself from perpetuating a coping pattern that was built out of that. Because once you dismantle that coping pattern, then you can have the ability to respond in a new way to the world. Because now you have the power. Otherwise, you don't have the energy, because all your energy is literally trapped in the old response pattern. It's trapped.
Yeah,
it's stuck. It's stuck. And the best way to get unstuck, we've given people some simple things that they can do on their own, but the very best way to get unstuck is to get help from somebody, to get help from somebody else who has unstuck themselves, that you can see has unstuck themselves, that you can see is showing up and relating and responding to the world in a different way than you are. So, for example, for me, when I walked into the yoga class the very first time, the teacher emanated peace, and my life was not peaceful. It was a nightmare at that point in my journey. And her holding of that essence of peacefulness, soon as I saw it, I was like, I want that. I don't care what I got to do. I don't care if I have to put my legs in a pretzel. I don't care if I dye my hair purple. I don't care if I have to stand on my head. I want what she's got. And so, finding those people in the world, because they are there, finding those people in the world that are behaving in ways that you would like to behave in your own life. Or prayer is another beautiful thing, because I've had so much divine intervention in my life. The right book falls off the bookshelf at the bookstore, and I happen to have that, pick it up and take it home and read it, and it makes a huge difference in my life. Or listening to a podcast and I hear somebody's story and I'm like, oh my God, that's my story. I need to talk to that person or hire that person to help me, right? Or going right straight to hiring somebody. Yeah.
And I agree. And of course, excuse me.
Yeah.
Way back in '89 when I got into this profession, I hired a coach who really helped me to get clear about my life purpose. So it's not something where I'm weak. I'm actually show my strength by reaching out. The other thing that we teach here, and picking up that you agree too, a lot of time our life is a reflection of the people we hang out with. So if we are hanging out with people who have conflict, who don't have peace, that have all the qualities we don't want, then what makes you think by hanging out with them that it's going to change? So you shift over to what you want, but you also have to kind of leave what you don't want as
Correct.
part of that decision making too. And I'm not suggesting that's easy. In a lot of cases, that's family members, or you have to limit your exposure. And
Absolutely.
you move into that new space. Now, we only have a few minutes left, if you can believe it already. And it's been just a natural flow in conversation, and that's what I like about you, Emerald. Now, before we get into some, I'll say, 5 minutes of closing remarks, I want to make sure that people know about how to get a hold of you. So what are the different ways that they can get a hold of you?
Sure. Well, I actually have a quiz that I've created that I think would be fun for your people. And I have a process called the Wealthy Life Method that I take people through to help them to dismantle some of the things that are going on in their lives so that they can actually free up that energy and redirect it towards the life that they're dreaming of and what they really want to do. So people can go to quiz.wealthylifementor.com, and that will give you on a scale, it's a scaled quiz. It will give you some feedback on how you might be either repelling wealth or being ready for a wealthy life. And I want to be clear, in my definition of a wealthy life is more than just money. A wealthy life is the sum total of all of the resources that come together to allow you to thrive in the world. And that includes your time, your health, your intellect and imagination and intuition, the energy exchange that you make with the world in the form of compensation, which is the money part, and then, of course, having fun with your friends, your family, and your fellow travelers on the journey. So that for me is a wealthy life, when all of those resources are in right relationship with each other and you are thriving. And so they can go, again, let me just give the URL again, quiz.wealthylifementor.com. And once you take the quiz, that will put you into my world. And certainly they can also tune into either of my podcasts. I sold the Men on Purpose podcast, but there's still 162 episodes that I did interviews that are up in the archive, or the Wickedly Smart Women podcast.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Emerald, for that. And we'll make sure, everybody, that URL is in the show notes on whatever platform you're listening on. So, Emerald, when we think about sort of encouraging, the listeners as we sort of wind this episode up, and then, of course, you have the Wealthy Life Method. What would be maximum 3 suggestions or recommendations to our listeners beyond what you've shared already for them to kind of take their life to the next level?
Okay. So the first thing that I would suggest is that you want to take inspired action. So if you're listening and you're inspired and you are feeling that urge to do something, whether it's take my quiz or enroll with Ken in something or enroll with somebody else who you've listened to on this podcast, take the action. Take inspired action. And I want to be really clear that there's a difference between taking action for action's sake and taking action because you're inspired. Inspired action is that welling up inside you of like, oh, this is my direction. This is where I'm being called to go. And even if it feels a little nervy, and even if it feels a little like, really, am I okay going in that direction? Take it, because that's inspired action. And that's your bigger self calling you forward, right? It's the bigger self that's reaching out its hand to you and saying, come, I am here to guide you. So number 1, I would say take inspired action. Number 2, I would say invest. And every time I've needed to take inspired action, I've needed to invest, whether it's time, energy, or money, or usually all of the above, right? So invest in the direction that you are being shown to go. And whether that's getting coaching services, or whether that's buying a book, or whether that is, spending time reflecting yourself all by yourself in, with some self-reflective questions that you've been given, take the time, make the investment, make the money investment, make the time investment to create the change, to create the conscious change that you want to create. And then the third thing I would say is immerse yourself. So if you have taken inspired action and you've invested, go all the way. Go deep. Don't be a surface skimmer. Go deep, because this is your life. Immerse yourself in what will support you to emerge with a life that is filled with magic and joy and pleasure and delight and right relationship with yourself and with the whole world.
Emerald, on that point, it is surprising and sometimes even, I don't even want to use the word shocking to me, individuals who want to make a difference or want to change their life, but they're not willing to invest. And then the other side, of course, is if you think about Olympic athletes, they don't get to be the best in the world because they work out 5 minutes a week. They're all in. If you want to use a Texas Hold'em. So you're saying, let's be all in. Let's do it. Let's get on.
Wholeheartedly. We have to be wholehearted. And the funny thing you said is people who say they want to change the world or change themselves, they don't really want to if they're not willing to invest. They really don't want to. That's just performative language. They're just saying, I just really want to change things. And all they're doing is putting, words out in the air that are not landing on anything because they're not willing to actually invest. If you're not willing to invest, stop saying you want to change, because you don't.
Oh, that's awesome. On that note, Emerald, that's good to end on, because we're really calling people out if you want to go to the next level. So, Emerald, thanks. Emerald GreenForest, thanks for hanging out with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Ken. It's been a pleasure.
Well, Secrets of Success listeners, Emerald GreenForest has given you some insights and a story, a really heartfelt story about going to the next level, that if Emerald can overcome those things that she's overcome to help other individuals to go to and realize their best, their purpose, their calling, their assignment. Sorry, no excuses. Take responsibility, but responsibility as described to change your responses to go to the next level. So, as always, we thank you for sharing your most valuable commodity, your time. If you like what we're doing, please share, pass it on, let somebody else know about what we're doing. Leave a positive comment on whatever platform you're listening on. Thank you for listening to Secrets of Success. I'm your host, Dr. Ken Keis.
Thanks for exploring the secrets of success with us. If you want to keep the momentum going, log on to crgleader.com. Scroll to the bottom and sign up for our inspirational emails. You can also take your success to the next level by following us on Facebook and Twitter and connecting with Ken on LinkedIn. We hope you have a great week and look forward to you joining us next time for the Secrets of Success podcast with Dr. Ken Keis.